Okay, Peters, it is the end of second lunch right now. We'll hear a bell here to get everybody into their 6th hour class. I am going to be finishing up the second half here of the last part of guided discussion number 7. Please make sure you're putting this in your notebooks, as it is important for you to know these for the test and also to kind of go along with what you've already read in the textbook. We finished off class by talking about the Berlin Wall, and I want to talk to you right now about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in October of 1962. After the Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuba and the Soviet Union became stronger allies, especially after the CIA was engaged in a number of bizarre plots to kill Castro. On October 16th of 1962, President Kennedy received spy plane photographs that showed Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba. For 6 days, Kennedy huddled with his advisors in secret meetings. Many of Kennedy's advisors suggested that he order an airstrike on the missile sites. However, Kennedy decided to instead put up a quarantine or blockade of Cuba. It's important to note that this is called a quarantine because a blockade was an act of war. And essentially where Navy ships would stop, U.S. Navy ships would stop all approaching vessels and search them for weapons. He also warned the Soviets to remove the missiles already in place in Cuba, or further steps would be taken. Kennedy went on national television on October 22nd of 1962. Let me repeat that. Kennedy went on national television on October 22nd of 1962, informing the American people of the missiles and his response. The world held its breath for several days as World War III seemed quite likely, and American troops assembled in Florida for an invasion of Cuba. Eventually, there was a deal that was made between the U.S. and the Russians. The Soviets agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in return for an American promise to never invade Cuba. There was also some stuff there about Turkey as well, and some of our missiles we had there. Some criticized Kennedy and said that he should have invaded Cuba and ousted Castro. However, people who were in favor of what he did said this is essentially what helped to avert an all-out nuclear war. Let's move on to Kennedy and Vietnam. By the time President Kennedy took office in 1961, the Viet Cong continued to gain strength throughout South Vietnam, especially in the countryside. Under Kennedy, the U.S. expanded Eisenhower's commitment in Vietnam by sending more military aid and increasing American military personnel in South Vietnam from 1,500 to 16,000. Americans were told that these men were simply advisors, uninvolved in combat missions, but as it turned out, many of them did go on combat missions. In the summer of 1963, a number of Buddhist monks in South Vietnam committed suicide by burning themselves to death. This is also known as immolating. They burned themselves to death in public, and the Buddhists were protesting the fact that the South Vietnamese leader Diem was prosecuting them, and he gave jobs and favors only to the Catholic minority that were in the country. In response, Diem had his security forces attack Buddhist temples, killing dozens and imprisoning thousands. Now, just a reminder, this is the guy who we are backing, who's doing this. Given his unpopularity and failure to make reforms, the U.S. concluded that Diem had to go, or South Vietnam would surely fall to communism. Therefore, on November 1st of 1963, a group of South Vietnamese generals staged a coup, and they overthrew Diem. They murdered him and his brothers and took control of the government. The U.S. promptly recognized the new government as being the true leaders of South Vietnam. Even with Diem gone and a new ruler in his place, the Viet Cong continued to fight against the government of South Vietnam. Would Kennedy have continued increasing American involvement in the war, historians will never know for sure because he was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963. Let's talk about the new frontier. Kennedy's administration had few legislative accomplishments. Kennedy was arguably a conservative Democrat, and he supported a bill to cut taxes. His New Frontier program, however, was supposed to be an expansion of FDR's New Deal, with programs such as medical assistance to the aged and increased federal aid to education. Kennedy's proposals were blocked by a coalition of Republicans and Southern Democrats. On November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. And of course, many people in America remember that date. Like a lot of people who are in my generation remember September 11th. They can recall a lot of the specific details of that date. So if you know anybody who was around during that time, you might want to ask them if they remember where they were when Kennedy was assassinated, when he was shot. So, all right, that's it for this last part of guided discussion number 7. Please make sure you look it over. All right.